First off, per Jim Foy's request, I am Dick Riemenschneider, and I currently sing with the Minneapolis Commodores, the Easy Listening Quartet, and the Silver Screen Quartet. But before I start my barbershop story, I have to tell you that I am honored and humbled to give my barbershop story along with the barbershop legends that have preceded me in this project. Compared to the international champs, the district champs, and just plain barbershop longevity, my story pales in comparison to all those people. But here it is. I grew up in a very small farm in Afton, Minnesota. I discovered my joy of singing at the age of 7, singing in a very small Sunday school, and I continued singing through high school. After high school, I pretty much abandoned my singing until 1989 when I joined the church choir and became and because of one of my mottos in life, anything worth doing is worth doing to excess, moderation is for monks, I also joined the handbell choir and became active in the administrative council of the church. I started barbershop in 1997. A member of our church was the sister of Merrill Miller from the Grandma's Bows Quartet, and that quartet sang at a Christmas party at a social function at our church in 1996. Bob Griffin plugged the Commodores with that performance, so I called him a couple months later asking for details about the Commodores, where they met and so forth. And in March of 1997, I went to the first chorus meeting. Bob Griffin should have gotten my Man of Note award, but at the time, Joe Hauser was calling on my work, selling cleaning stuff. I think that's what he sold. And when I arrived at chorus, Joe immediately grabbed me, took me into tow, introduced me to at least 110% of the people that were in the room, probably some people that he dragged in off the street, and sat me down next to him to sing lead. And I sang lead for about 10 minutes, and I thought, well, this is kind of boring, and I was listening to those guys singing those really high notes, and so I went over and sat next to Mike Stump and became a tenor. And then I joined the chorus in 1997 in June, but I think Hauser got my Man of Note and probably stole it away from Griffin, and of course we would know that about Hauser. He would do something like that, wouldn't he? I was on the Commodore's board for a couple of years in the late 90s. I was a treasurer for 2000 to 2004. And in 2006, I took over as the nut sales coordinator, but that story comes later. After singing with the chorus for a couple of years, a guy by the name of Vern Halverson asked me if I'd like to sing tenor in his quartet called Twin City Classics. Twin City Classics had Vern as lead, John Kowalski as Barry, Brooks Ferguson as bass, and then I was the tenor. Classics were named because Vern restored old Ford cars, 1930s Ford cars. Had a couple of them in his garage. He liked the classic cars, and he thought we were all pretty old and we could be qualified as classics too, so he called us the Twin City Classics. Vern promoted that quartet shamelessly, and we sang out 5, 6, 7 times a year. We weren't always good, but by golly, we were enthusiastic. After John Kowalski died, that quartet disbanded, and in the early 2000s, Dan Smith asked me if I'd like to get in a quartet with him, so we formed a quartet called Boundary Waters. That was Dan on lead, Jim Johansson on Barry, Tom Dowland on bass, and myself on tenor. And we didn't do much in that quartet, but we did go to a quartet school down in Winona. And I particularly remembered the great coaching we had down there, and maybe the best coaching session we had was by a fellow from south of here by the name of Jim Bagby. Excellent coaching. After a hiatus that quartet disbanded more than likely from lack of activity. And then after a hiatus from coaching, Jeff Vanderplatz was unable to keep on singing tenor for a quartet called Easy Listening, so Dan Slattery asked if I would be tenor in that quartet, which I joined in 1910. That quartet is Dan Slattery lead, John Carlotto Barry, and Rod Vink bass, me singing tenor. Dan Slattery was very ambitious in getting performances for that quartet, And we performed 6 or 8 gigs a year from 2010 till the start of COVID. And on Friday, September 16th, we had our first private performance in 155 weeks. It was nice to be back singing for people. And then in mid-2002, Silver Screen was without a Barry, so I threw my hat into the ring to see if I could get the Barry part. I kind of figured I was a shoo-in because the last 2 Barrys were named Richard. We had Ricky Chaddock, who was the Barry for a year or 2, and then Rick Anderson was the lead, and I figured they had to have a Richard and Barry, so that was me. And I'm singing right now with them. My position with Silver Screen is I am the long-term long-term semi-permanent approval status. Maybe someday I'll make the grade. Now to the nut sales. In the fall of 2006, I took over coordination of the nut sales effort from Bill and Eunice Hamray and Don and Dolores Milton. In the beginnings of the fundraiser are pretty sketchy, but I do have a nut invoice from 1987 for 9 cases of nuts and a total of 270 pounds. But I'm pretty sure it went on before that, and I'm still working on trying to figure out how early that started. One kind of neat story about the nuts is that Bill and Eunice moved into their townhome in Plymouth in November. I can't remember the year, but they moved in the AM into that townhome, and at noon the truck arrived from Wilmer with 3,000 pounds of nuts. They hadn't even unpacked the boxes yet. Now I am very proud of the fact that in the 16 full years I have coordinated the nut sales effort, that effort has enriched the Commodore's treasury by $157,400. And I thank you guys for your support in that, and thanks to all the Commodores for their enthusiastic efforts in the sales effort. That being said, in those 16 years, I have personally lifted 39,403 pounds of nuts. That's 20 tons of nuts. Now that, 20 tons, that's not, a 20-ton big deal, but you gotta remember, I lift those nuts 7 times. They come in off the truck. They come from the floor to the table to get broken down. They go from the table to the floor to get set up. And then they go from the floor to the table to get sorted. Then they go from the table to the floor into where they're going to go. Then they go from the table, from the floor to the car to go down to the chorus. And then they go from the car in. So in all that time, I have lifted 140 tons of nuts. Along the way, I participated in harmony brigades, starting with the first 2 experimental brigades at the Cotts schools, the first one in Menominee and the second one in River Falls. And then I participated in the Northern Pines Harmony Brigade from 2015 to 2021. And it's been a marvelous experience singing in the brigades. Now when I look back on my 25 years in this hobby, I have several unforgettable times. And one of them, and Gary Jacobson figures in 2 of these. We're not surprised at that, right? I participated with Gary in the naming ceremony of a baby orangutan at Como Park. And I don't know how he wangled this, but he had our quartet sing for that occasion. And I'm pretty sure that we sang a variation of Gorilla of My Dreams. And the other high point, again with Gary Jacobson being the driving force, in 2016, we won the Comedy Quartet Contest, singing When I Was in the German Army, with, I think that's a John Hanson thing, but I'm not sure, complete with uniforms, garbage bags for a tunic, with painting, with the tunic painting all over it, and a plastic helmet with a spiky thing sticking out of the top. And I think we probably won based on Gary's creative costume. But my most memorable experience was in 2007 when we went to International in Denver with the Mason City Chorus. We had 148 guys on stage between the Commodores and Mason City, and we finished 18th in the world with 5 rehearsals with the 2 choruses. That was just amazing. And it was that association with the Commodores in Mason City that prompted me to put out some feelers on whether there were any choruses that wanted to do some joint meetings. And on July 12th of this year, the Commodores in Stillwater had a joint meeting at their place in Stillwater. And man, we had a good time at the church they rehearsed in. We had a good time at Afterglow, well represented at the Afterglow. And that is something that we really need to promote in our area here. With all these barbershop choruses, we need to promote more of this joint rehearsal. Get together, get to know people. And of course, I'm preaching to the choir here, because what do we got? 5, 6, 7 chapters represented here. You guys know that, but we need to get that word out. And I do have to say that in my 25 years of barbershopping, I've done a lot in my life and been to a lot of places, but I'm really most proud, and the thing that's given me the most pleasure is my barbershop experience. And thank you for letting me tell my story.